Thank you. And thank you, Senator Kyle and Rachel and the Institute for organizing this important event. It's important to my perspective because there are growing opportunities for financial warfare, and in the area of financial warfare is very different from the traditional economic warfare that we're all familiar with, even the dirty tricks of counterfeiting your enemy's money in time of war. And financial warfare is inherently susceptible to cyber attack, the drama that you heard about. But then we shudder every day when we read about like the 75 billion a couple weeks ago that just disappeared from accounts, or the flash crash, or any number of things in our popular imagination. But another perspective on financial warfare involves the common vulnerabilities, the vulnerabilities that arise from familiar events and conditions, in a sense, the threats that are hiding in plain sight, given the right circumstances. Economics is seen to be such a boring area of endeavor, so indulge me if we engage in a little bit of fantasy for a minute and find some use in that fantasy to get our imaginations working on security. In mid-2014, a certain Asian country holding over $4 trillion in U.S. Official and agency debt announces that it will exchange $1 or $2 trillion for exclusive food production rights in California and mineral rights in Alaska. After this settles in a little bit, capital starts to flee from the United States. Between Christmas and New Year's, the week of holiday in Washington, a gigantic storm hits the East Coast. Electricity is gone, which we're familiar with here in Washington. Not unthinkable. At which time, some suspected sabotage occurs on the metro system, on some other infrastructure involving transport, which is fairly shut down anyway because of the snow. Assassinations occur, a couple of them. They appear to be random, like the sniper attack in 2001 after 9/11. And some of them go after high-value targets, like the heads of some investment banks in New York, or Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Throw in a little biochemical attack, like the unsolved anthrax of 2001. An attack on a water supply that doesn't kill anybody, but it just means no one can use the water because, fortunately, in the case of Washington, the Corps of Engineers is founded in time. But my point is, these are all familiar events. They're all not unthinkable. They're all realistic, and they're all possible. And they all cause panic, and they all cause a loss of confidence in the financial system and in our security system. And this is not good for the economy. As David Hammond pointed out, confidence is severely impaired. Or consider another scenario. This comes from a Pentagon report released last year, where certain shadowy parties manipulated the price of oil to rise in 2007, in the wake of which it manipulated through CDS market and dark pool action the bear rate on Bear Stearns and ultimately on Lehman, leading to what we all know, the gigantic debt spiral that we're living with, which kind of shoots our wad so that when the real financial attack occurs in a few months, we have no powder left. Ultimately, the renminbi ends up as the reserve currency, global reserve currency. Something, again, that's not unthinkable, as already moves are underway. They are working on convertibility, on exchange rate flexibility. The IMF is discussed with them, including the renminbi in the SDR basket. These are all realistic, and you can adjust or substitute other events, or if you think one is wrong, stick in another one. There's plenty to play with. They're not particularly cyber-oriented. They kind of wait for the target, that is U.S. finance, to appear in its sights rather than attack at the wrong time. The U.S. financial sector is a prize. It's got a larger role in the U.S. economy than ever before. It was 2.8% of GDP in 1950. It's 8.5 in 2010, slightly down to 8.4 last year. It's also, while deep and innovative and very large, it's also concentrated, it's obscure, its practices. It's instituted dependency of the real economy, the manufacturing economy, on finance. You remember in 2008 how Secretary Paulson and Ben Bernanke went to the Congress, said we might not have an economy after this weekend because corporate paper was all frozen up, because people couldn't understand counterparty risks. Nobody knew who to trust. The whole thing was on the verge of collapse, as stated by the two officials whose task is to stabilize markets in the United States traditionally. U.S. money trade has surpassed real trade in goods and merchandise. It's now finance a direct source of GDP rather than just a facilitator of growth, which is its traditional economic role, rather than a producer of growth, a facilitator of growth by efficient allocation of resources. And it's become more susceptible than anything else in the U.S. economy. Now, we think every day about two big Wall Street events. 9/11, it was a Wall Street event. It was I remember reading at the time, everyone surmised it was the reason that attack was made there. And the other one, 2008, the meltdown that we're still living with. It's interesting to compare the two. The first is a traditional guerrilla military attack by an external enemy. It was had a single non-discretionary target, in the sense there's nothing much you could do about the World Trade Center except have a more modest building or live in caves or something. It was intelligible to Americans. It was possible because procedures, fairly simple procedures, failed, and they enabled this to happen. And the target was attractive for symbolic reasons, but there was a real attempt to have an impact, we understand, on the real economy. It failed. There was little damage to U.S. confidence. In fact, we kind of roared after 9/11. 2008, this is an internal, in a sense, self-generated or self-inflicted event by systemic conditions and practices. Procedures allowed it, maybe a regulatory failure, but complex products, counterparty risks, things not understood, things that were mysterious to most Americans and had obscure origins. Indeed, we've had an inquiry into it and still can't get a unified story about what happened and why. Everyone's got a version. But it was an aggregation of discretionary problems, little issues, little reasons, little regulations. The target is hugely important, the U.S. economy, and it had huge impact on the real economy. I don't need saying that, do I? And it's greatly damaged U.S. confidence. In fact, economists look at why, just as an aside, why is it now neither austerity nor deficit spending and stimulus have much effect wherever they're tried? Well, they do work in some places. They've looked at some countries where they work. The thing they find out is that one or the other can work, but it depends. It really requires a high degree of confidence and trust in the government going into the event. And if that's lacking, as it is in the United States, or as it could be lacking when after a orchestrated attack, these things don't work in the normal way, if at all. The 2008 event is significant, more significant to the economy. It led to wider, longer damage. Both involved familiar things that were used, in a sense, as weapons to hurt the United States. Both of them are likely. They have great potential to devastate, in part because the financial sector has just grown so large. Big difference is 9/11 is seen as a terrorist act, and the 2008 is not, so far as we know. Although there is suspicion that there may be enemy interests who were playing at the margins in that, if not actually orchestrating it. There are theories about this. But what if the terrorists really wanted to engineer a 2008 meltdown? Is it possible? How would the financial sector react On the other hand, if a mass weapon attack occurred on a major hub like New York City, is enough being done to make resilient the sector so that a cascading set of failures would not be contagious or spread to other markets? Could a different kind of terrorist attack succeed in destabilizing our financial sector and impair the real economy? Now, there are many ways of evaluating this. I put some of them on this chart that may have been handed out to you, and I'm going to cruise it very, very briefly. And this is just a suggestive matrix. And it shows the kind of vulnerabilities on the left side that we could do something about, and then the mitigations going out to the right. And they grow from preemptive action to defense action and then restoration type action. I'm not going to go through. These things are pretty familiar, but you can see on the policy side, large foreign debt with an intervention there of reducing it, and the size and concentration of the finance sector. And there are plenty of proposals about decentralization. This is too big to fail, and what to do about too big to fail. And may I just say, from an economist standpoint, a healthy sector doesn't really like to, doesn't really want to entertain the question of too big to fail. A healthy sector has market entrance and market departures constantly. There are births and deaths of firms. It's not a case of where certain oligopolistic firms dominate and must be saved at all costs. Capital flows, strategic assets, I don't want to take too much time, but these are, the main thing to say about this, these are all policies that can be addressed. These are things that can be done in the preemptive way to reduce our financial vulnerability. Going to the second one, these are financial firms' practices. They're familiar, the CDS, the naked short selling, dark pools, off-exchange sales and trading, derivatives, high-frequency trade. The liquidity swap is a new idea that hasn't really emerged yet about how to get around collateral, new higher collateral requirements. My point is there's ways to address all of these things, including the Section 342 in the Dodd-Frank bill, which tries to establish a more inclusive financial sector, that is one that's more open, that's not so clubby, that's has more of the hallmarks of a healthy sector with entrance and departures. And the real thing I want to focus on is the last bit, the synergistic cases. And the reason for that is that this is where you really get to confidence. When a cumulative impact of small familiar events, leveraging relatively minor familiar conditions into something significant. It's a bit like the automobile. We're told how the automobile wasn't really invented. It's just that certain people aggregated technologies that were kind of lying around. They were all known, they were there, and they had to be put together in a certain way, and something very clever and very important with huge impact was the result. And so too, the way things are put together, the sequence in which they happen can have great impact. The big impact, as I say, is on confidence and on trust. The financial sector is built on this. The role in economics of confidence and trust has been underappreciated. Keynes wrote about animal spirits, and there are other references. But what are the tipping points from a security standpoint? How large do these attacks on confidence have to be to have a real impact? And under what kind of economic conditions? What kind of political conditions? And different debt levels, biochemical attacks. What will it take to freeze the system worse than it did in 2008 when we saw an attack on confidence? In that final section on the paper, the synergistic impacts, the first one is for the finance industry proper, that is, as a sector by itself, and the second one is when talking about the finance of the real economy, which may be a real more impact. And I say that these are more complicated. They feed back to each other, where a good public image of resilience will ward off attack because it's a deterrent. And if the plans are known, like a kind of a stress test for financial vulnerability, we apply stress tests for bank operations under different economic circumstances. Well, why not have a stress test for financial vulnerability to terrorist attack? And anyway, there are various proposals like this that can be backup liquidity plans, a second source of of money in time of dire cyber attack that will give assurance to the players in the economy. More study is needed, more inventory and specificity and measurement of the risks, and the design interventions are needed. Domestic financial vulnerability is a prism through which to view economic policy and structure and industry practices. Thank you very much.